Whale populations around the world are recovering after decades of over-exploitation by the whaling industry. But this thriving population is now facing the challenge of climate change and ocean warming. Researchers from Australia, South Africa and South America have joined forces to address this problem. And we're now joined by Dr Olaf Meinecke, Manager of the Whales and Climate Program and researcher from Griffith University. Doctor, thanks for joining us today. You've just returned from Antarctica, where you're looking to better understand the climate impacts on whale species. How was the trip?
It was a very exciting trip. It was also on board with a special guest, Dr. Sylvia Earle from the States, and we've been very lucky to head out there to explore some of that environment, of course. And for me, it was the first time, but in all that sort of a wonderful environment, there's also there's trouble in that place, and the humpback whales that we're particularly looking at, which are impacted by climate change as any other species on this planet, they're feeding in this area, and they're starting to change the way they're feeding, where they're feeding, and how often they actually migrate to that part of Antarctica. So we went to West Antarctic Peninsula, which is sort of like the top of the Antarctic region that is actually impacted by warming stronger or more than any other place in the Antarctic. And of course, the whales are responding to this with a change in their behavior.
Oh, how concerned are you about the change in behavior?
With humpback whales, they are quite intelligent, and they are definitely capable of adapting to changes, and we're seeing that they're adapting around the world in different populations. These changes include seeking out new places for feeding. So we've got super groups come up where a lot of whales feed outside the traditional feeding grounds. And they are also capable of actually social feed or single feed, depending on what food supply they have. And they can seek out food over thousands of kilometers if they have to. I am concerned about the fact that, we've got more and more whales, in particular in the northern hemisphere, that are actually looking for food in places where they normally do not go. They are exposed to higher risk, vessel strikes, entanglement in fishing gear. So it's like a secondary impact that comes with that search for different food sources that is concerning, because the number of whales that are entangled, the number of whales that are involved in vessel strikes is actually increasing drastically over the last couple of years.
So the whales which travel along Australia's east coast and through the so-called Blue Corridor, they may soon not be able to get enough food for their long migration north.
So what they're doing is basically changing their migration timing. So they know that there is a shift in food availability in Antarctica, and that means that arriving earlier in some places is of benefit, and leaving earlier is also beneficial because there's no food to gain. So the problem is that they are obviously requiring to seek out new food sources if possible. So we've actually seen more subadults staying in the Australian waters, and that actually, of course, creates other issues with entanglements, for instance. So while the humpback whale population is relatively stable at this point, we're sort of concerned that we might reach a point where there was a decline happening because the whales are not able to find enough food or not able to reproduce quickly enough. So far, humpback whales have been the success story of conservation in the marine world, and they are a great and a wonderful story to talk about when it comes to recovery of a baleen whale from whaling. But of course, they are now sort of on the front line of change because their numbers are high. There's a lot of them out there, and they all need food.
So researchers have shown that whales are already adapting by having their calves further south. Is that because they don't have the energy to make it to their old breeding grounds?
So we think one of the adaptation is that they can have births in sort of like temperate or in subtropical waters. They do not need to migrate all the way up to the north, where it's obviously warmer. So for instance, the Great Barrier Reef or Ningaloo Reef. they can actually have birds along their way. And they've been doing this in the past, but we are really noticing that, we've seen calving in New South Wales, so really in the sort of more temperate to subtropical waters. And of course, by doing this, they don't have to migrate as far. So it's almost 2,000 or 3,000 kilometers that they do not have to swim, and they can save the energy and put it to the calf.
Okay, so what's next for you? What will you be looking into?
So we have gathered a lot of data from various researchers and organizations, and one of the big aims is to analyze this data for patterns. So it's over 150,000 sightings of humpback whales that we're going to look at, and the sort of aim is to find out what kind of long-term trends can we find in the data and how it relates to climate change.